I used to wonder why some moments stay with us while whole years disappear. You know the kind of moments I mean. A quiet afternoon, a short conversation, a person you never saw before and never met again. Nothing special on the outside, but for some reason your mind keeps going back to it, as if there's a message there you haven't fully unpacked. That question stayed with me for a long time. Why do strangers sometimes see us more clearly than the people who know us best? And why do a few simple words from someone we'll never meet again echo longer than entire chapters of our own story? I didn't really understand it until the year everything in my life felt like it was falling apart. It was a quiet collapse, the kind that doesn't make headlines. No big explosion, no public drama, just a slow drifting away from myself. On paper, things were fine. I had a job, I was paying the bills, I had people who cared about me. But I woke up most mornings with the same heavy thought. Is this it? Is this all my life is going to be? If you've ever moved through your days with that low background ache, you know how exhausting it can be. You still show up, you still smile, you do what's expected. But somewhere inside, there's a room that feels dark and empty. You don't know what's supposed to be in that room, but you can feel the absence. Around that time, I heard an interview with Keanu Reeves. He was talking about grief, about loss, about the quiet way suffering can reshape you. People were expecting some polished celebrity answer. Instead, he spoke slowly, almost shyly, and said something like, "Grief never ends, it just changes shape." There was no performance in his words, no attempt to sound wise, just this calm honesty, like he was sitting on a bench next to you, telling the truth because anything else would be disrespectful to what he'd lived through. I didn't know him, obviously. To him, I was just part of the distant crowd listening through a screen. But the way he spoke felt strangely personal. It was like someone had walked into that dark room inside me, looked around and said, "It's okay, I've been here too." But the lesson I'm going to share with you today didn't come from a famous person. It came from a stranger in a park. And somehow, both those moments, the calm words of a distant actor and the quiet wisdom of an old man whose name I never learned, melted together and changed the way I move through this life. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. I had left work early, not for any real reason I could explain, just because my chest felt tight and my thoughts wouldn't stop circling the same questions. What am I doing with my life? When did I stop feeling excited to wake up? Is everyone else just pretending too? I wandered into a small park near my apartment. It wasn't anything special. A couple of trees, a playground, a short walking track, the kind of place you only notice when you're trying to avoid going home too early. I sat down on a bench under a tree and watched people passing by. A woman jogging with her headphones in, a father pushing his child on a swing, an elderly couple walking slowly hand in hand. Everyone seemed to be moving with purpose, like they had somewhere they belonged. I took out my phone, opened it, closed it again. Nothing there that would actually help. I could have messaged someone, but I didn't want to explain why I felt so heavy when I had no dramatic story to justify it. After a few minutes, an older man sat down at the other end of the bench. He wore a light jacket, even though the day was warm. His hands moved a little slower than the rest of him, as if they were still catching up. There was a quiet steadiness about him, not the kind of presence that demands attention, but the kind that settles gently into the space it's given. We sat there in silence at first, just two people sharing a bench, looking out at a world that seemed perfectly comfortable without us. Then, without turning his head, he said almost to himself, "Busy world for a tired heart." The sentence was simple, but it landed in me like a stone dropped into water. I glanced at him, trying to decide if he was talking to me or just thinking out loud. He noticed my look, smiled faintly, and added, "You look like your heart's been running a marathon without leaving your chest." I laughed, a short, surprised sound. "Is it that obvious?" He shrugged gently. "Age teaches you to recognize the look. You're not bored, you're not even sad exactly. You're just carrying something you haven't named yet." I didn't know this man. He didn't owe me anything. But in that moment, he saw something people who knew me well had missed, or maybe something I had been hiding too carefully for them to notice. I don't remember what made me do it, but I answered honestly. Not with my whole life story, not with every detail, just with the simple truth I had been avoiding. "I think I'm lost," I said. "Everything in my life is fine. Nothing is really wrong. But it feels like I'm walking through a version of my life that's slightly off, like I took a wrong turn 5 years ago and never noticed." He nodded slowly, as if he'd been waiting to hear exactly that. "Ah," he said, "the quiet kind of lost, that's the worst kind, you know. When your life looks okay from the outside, it's very easy to ignore the voice inside that keeps saying, 'This doesn't feel like me.'" We fell into a conversation that didn't feel like starting something new. It felt more like picking up a thread that had been hanging in the air for a long time, waiting for someone to grab it. He told me a little about his own younger years, growing up in a small town, taking the first job that offered security, telling himself he was lucky even as he felt himself shrinking a little bit each year. "I spent so many years being a practical man," he said, "that I forgot I was also a human being." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a plain acceptance, a gentle looking back. I asked him, "So what changed?" He smiled at a memory I couldn't see, a stranger funny enough. "I waited. One day when I was around your age, I was riding a bus home after a long shift. I was exhausted, like a gray version of myself. The man sitting next to me started talking. I was annoyed at first. I just wanted to stare out the window and disappear. He chuckled quietly, but he kept talking, not about anything important, just little details of his day. He had this lightness about him, this quiet joy, as if just being alive was enough reason to pay attention. At some point he asked me, "Do you like your life?" He paused. I could feel the weight of the question. I told him it was fine, that I had a good job, that I was lucky. He listened, nodded, and then said, "That's not what I asked. I didn't ask if your life makes sense. I asked if you like it." The old man looked at me, his eyes soft but steady. That bus ride lasted 20 minutes. I never saw that man again, but his question followed me for years. Do you like your life? Not is it stable, not does it look respectable, just do you like it? He let the silence sit between us, giving me space to really hear it. No one had asked me that question so directly before. People had asked how work was going, if I was dating, if I was doing well. But do you like your life? Felt different. It felt uncomfortably honest. I thought of my days, waking up to an alarm I hated, scrolling my phone in bed, commuting to a job that barely engaged me, coming home too tired to do anything but watch other people live fictional lives on a screen. I thought of the way Sunday evenings felt like a slow closing of a door. Did I like my life? No clear answer came out, just a tightening in my throat. The old man noticed but didn't push. Instead, he said something I've remembered ever since. "Sometimes," he said, "a stranger is free to ask you the questions the people who love you are afraid to ask. They don't have a stake in your answer. They're not trying to protect you from discomfort. They're not worried that your truth will change their life. They can just hold up a mirror and walk away." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was worn from being handled many times. On it, in simple handwriting, was a sentence. "Don't rush to fix your life. First, learn to see it clearly." He laughed softly at my expression. "An old friend wrote that for me a long time ago," he said. "I've carried it ever since. You can think of this conversation as my way of passing it on." We talked for a while longer. He told me he had stayed in that practical job for many more years, but slowly, gently, he had started to reclaim small pieces of himself. He signed up for a night class in painting. He took walks without headphones, letting his thoughts wander like untrained dogs. He learned to say no to things that drained him and yes to things that made him feel quietly alive. "It wasn't dramatic," he said. "No big movie moment, just a slow rearranging of what mattered to me. That stranger on the bus didn't rescue me. He just reminded me that I was allowed to ask for more from my own days." I asked him if he ever found a life he truly liked. He considered this carefully. "I found a life I can be honest in," he said. Some days I like it, some days I don't. But at least now, when I look at my choices, I recognize the person who made them. That's enough. There was something incredibly peaceful in that answer. It wasn't the kind of inspiring quote you put on a poster. It was quieter than that, but more real. As the sun began to soften and the shadows grew longer, our conversation drifted to a natural pause. He stood up slowly, using the armrest for support. Before he left, he looked at me one last time and said, "By the way, if you ever feel lost again, try this. Instead of asking what you should do with your life, ask how you want to feel in your days. Start from there. Life is just a collection of days, after all." And then he walked away. No dramatic goodbye, no exchange of names or numbers, just a simple departure as if he had finished the small task he was meant to do on that bench. I sat there for a long time after he left. The park didn't look different. The people were still moving, the world still spinning. But inside, something had shifted. Not a big revelation, not a clear plan, just a subtle sense that I had been given permission to question the script I'd been following. On my way home, I remembered Keanu Reeves talking about grief. The way he spoke quietly without dressing his pain in fancy words. The way he accepted that some things don't fully heal, they just become part of who we are. I realized that I had been grieving something too, even if I didn't have a name for it. I was grieving the version of myself I thought I was supposed to be, the one who had it all figured out by a certain age, the one who followed a straight path from goal to goal, achievement to achievement, the one who never sat on a park bench wondering if they'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. I had been trying to fix that grief by forcing myself to be grateful, by saying, "It's fine, it could be worse," instead of admitting, "I don't like this version of my life and I don't fully recognize the person living it." The old man's words, and the memory of that quiet actor speaking about loss, blended into a simple understanding. You don't need a dramatic event to justify feeling lost. You don't need permission from anyone to question the way you're living. And sometimes, the people who help you see that most clearly are the ones who have no history with you at all. In the weeks that followed, I didn't quit my job or move to a different country. There was no sudden transformation. Instead, I started with something smaller, something the old man's friend had written on that paper. Don't rush to fix your life. First, learn to see it clearly. I began paying attention to my days. Not in a judgmental way, just in a curious one. I asked myself, when do I feel most like myself? When do I feel drained and hollow? What am I doing when time passes gently, instead of grinding forward? I noticed that I felt calmer when I walked to work instead of taking the bus, even if it took longer. I noticed that I came alive a little when I wrote, even if it was just a few lines in a notebook. I noticed that certain conversations left me feeling strangely empty, like I had been performing a version of myself instead of just being. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, my choices began to shift. I started saying no to some social obligations that I had been attending out of habit, not desire. I carved out small pockets of time to write, with no expectation of turning it into anything impressive. I adjusted my work schedule where I could, to give myself one afternoon each week that wasn't claimed by anyone else. These were tiny changes. From the outside, my life probably looked exactly the same. But inside, that dark room started to feel less empty. Not full, not bright, but occupied. I was there now, paying attention. Every now and then, I sat on that same bench in the park, half hoping I might see the old man again. I never did. But in a way, it didn't matter. The point of his presence was not to become part of my ongoing story. It was to turn a light on at a moment when I needed it. I started to realize something else too. We're often taught to look for wisdom in big official places, in books, seminars, famous speeches, carefully curated content. Those things can be valuable, of course, but some of the most honest truths arrive unannounced, in plain clothes, spoken by someone who will never know the impact of what they said. There's a quiet beauty in that. It means the world is full of teachers who don't know they are teachers. It means we ourselves have probably been that stranger for someone else, without even realizing it. Maybe you once said a kind word to a cashier who was having a rough day. Maybe you answered a friend's late-night text with a simple line of reassurance they still remember. Maybe you shared a small piece of your own struggle, and someone listening felt less alone. You'll never know the full effect. You're not supposed to. That's the humble grace of these fleeting connections. The title of this story mentions Keanu Reeves for a reason. Not because this is a story about him, but because he represents something quietly powerful. The way a single person's sincere honesty, even from far away, can give others permission to be honest too. When he spoke about grief, he wasn't trying to offer a solution. He was simply refusing to pretend that loss can be neatly resolved. In a similar way, the old man on the bench didn't try to fix my life. He didn't tell me to quit my job or chase a dream or reinvent myself overnight. All he did was ask a better question. Do you like your life? And then he trusted me to sit with the answer. Sometimes that's all we really need. Not advice, not a roadmap. Just someone who sees the confusion we've been trying to hide and gently says, it's okay to feel this. It's okay to ask more of your days. It's okay to not have it all figured out. Looking back now, I realize that the greatest lessons from strangers are not usually complicated. They're often just simple truths we were too scared to say to ourselves. That grief doesn't have to be hidden. That being fine is not the same as being alive. That we're allowed to like our own life, not just tolerate it. That slow change is still change. And most of all, that we're not as alone in our confusion as we think. If there's a quiet insight I've carried from that afternoon on the bench, it's this. Life isn't a single story we're trying to get right on the first try. It's a series of conversations, with ourselves, with the people who love us, and sometimes with complete strangers who cross our path at exactly the right moment. Those strangers won't walk the road for us. They won't stay to witness every step. But they might, for a brief and ordinary minute, turn our head just enough so we can see a different direction we hadn't noticed before. And later, when we look back and trace the line of who we've become, we may find that a small part of it bends gently around one simple question, spoken by someone whose name we never learned. Do you like your life? If you pause now and listen closely, you might hear that question in your own chest. You don't have to answer it right away. You don't have to make any sudden moves. Just let it sit with you. Notice what stirs. Let your own truth rise slowly, without pressure, without judgment. Sometimes the greatest lesson a stranger can give us is not a piece of advice, but a doorway into a more honest conversation with ourselves. And once that conversation begins, quietly, gently, your life, the one you actually live day after day, can start to change shape from the inside out.